Well, Sam, congratulations on a book of major scholarship charting centuries of movement. But in the end, I was left asking myself, because I did read the book quite carefully, why did you write it? There was a hint at one point that you were trying to put right our amnesia. Explain what you meant by that.
I think there is a modern amnesia about migration. It's different in different countries, but it's an amnesia in which we behave as though we're naturally settled in one place, when actually the story of the human species is one of migration. More so than any other land mammal, we reached every part of the globe. Before we had planes and trains and all of that, we walked, we used rafts, and we reached almost everywhere. There's no other species, possibly the rat who was following us, that came close to that.
Fair enough. But at some points you seem to be disparaging of people who stay in one place, talking about sedentarism. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that the human race had to become sedentary because being nomadic, there weren't enough nuts and animals that we could kill to go around. So we settled and we farmed. So actually this was a progress. Becoming sedentary was a progress. And it's not something to be sneered at. It is what's made possible the increase in the global population and its prosperity.
Yeah, no, and if I give the impression of that I've disparaged sedentarism, that's entirely wrong. All I'm saying is it's relatively new in the story of the human race, that people talk about even 300 or 400 years ago, about half the world was on the move, was nomadic, in the old-fashioned sense of that word. In terms of deep history, agriculture is only 10,000 12,000 years old. And the fact remains that ever since we have been moving, often moving to new lands to farm. If you think about the European migration to North America, to South America, that is largely a movement where people went to farm lands that hadn't been farmed before and where nomadic people or settled people lived prior to that.
I mean, I assume that your book is meant to be, as it were, pro-migration. But some of the migrations you record have, of course, been catastrophic for the indigenous receiving population. So Europeans going to North and South America, Europeans going to New Zealand, going to Australia, and even, I might say, in the view of Palestinians, the movement of Jewish people to Palestine to set up the State of Israel is regarded as a catastrophe. What is it then about migration that you want to commend to us?
I want us to remind ourselves in all of the arguments, the often very toxic arguments that we have about migration, one, that we're all descended from migrants, all of us, some very recently, some in a slightly more distant past. Two, that migration is normal. That doesn't make it right or wrong, but it's a thing that we've always done and are continuing to do it. And people who go about saying, oh, we can just stop it, just aren't being realistic most of the time. There are countries that have successfully stopped inward migration, but they do it at great cost to themselves, usually. North Korea, for instance. There aren't many people trying to get into North Korea at the moment.
You go quite far in your book. At one moment, for example, you say, how can we say to a person from Africa, you shall not come to Europe, given our history of colonisation and indeed of enslavement? I mean, are you serious? No politician trying to manage the policies of this country or any other can say, well, look, I can't deny entry to an African because I feel guilty about slavery, even if we should and do feel guilty about slavery.
No, I'm not saying they should be allowed in. I think it is part of the story that we have to recognise. And anyone who pretends that we can just draw a line over even the quite recent past just isn't realistic. It's part of the way this world is structured, and that a lot of Africans, a lot of Asians, a lot of people from the Caribbean have memories of those times, and if we disparage those memories or pretend that they're not worthwhile or not worthy of interest or as part of the debate, then we're in trouble, I think.
At another moment, you talk about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who deplored the moment when a man, presumably it was a man rather than a woman, first declared, this is my private property and put down a boundary. But again, you're not being serious, are you? You're not really against private property. I would even challenge you to imagine a world without frontiers. Is that possible?
So, on the question of property, I think what's important is we try and work out, and there have been some recent very interesting studies about it. Look back at that bit of property you own, you personally, how did it come to be in someone's possession in the first place? And the asking of that question doesn't mean you have to return it to some mythical, imagined original owner, but it does create, I think, a bit of humility about the fact that you own this land and someone else doesn't, and someone else once used it for other purposes.
We are very lucky, I would say. We're very lucky to be British. We're very lucky to be born. I was born in the late 20th century, etc., etc., etc. And there are lots of unfortunate people who didn't have that luck. And they might say that they have the same human right to live here. But being practical for a moment, and if you would very briefly, because we're just coming to an end, what does your book say to the people who are worried about the schools and the health services, let's say in Kent, which are coming under pressure from Albanians arriving on boats on the shores?
That we've got to have realistic migration policies. By not having realistic, by just trying to keep everyone out, what we get, the people who come in then are mainly young men who are willing to take what seem to most of us like ludicrous risks, who are persuasive. Some of them need to be very good at lying to get in. Those are the migrants we are choosing at the moment, because of our lack of policies on migration, to have coming here. Actually, for various economic reasons, for other historical reasons, there are lots of other possible migrants who we might be welcoming here.